Good morning and welcome to another episode of On the Couch with Creatives, the show where we talk to creative professionals, whatever the creative industry. I'm Melanie Perry,
And I'm Julie Hyde-Mew.
and this is On the Couch with Creatives. Fans and followers of our show will know that we're part of the Creatives Group, the private network for creative professionals everywhere. Together, we help you create at your best, connect you with like-minded individuals, therefore helping you to grow your creative business. That sounds like a good idea to you? Please reach out to us after the show. We'd be delighted to hear from you. But as I keep saying, this is On the Couch. So who do we have on the couch today, Julie?
Well, on the couch today is children's poet and author Joshua Seigal. And Joshua is a highly acclaimed, award-winning professional poet and performer who uses poetry and rhymes to develop literacy skills and to inspire confidence and creativity in communication. He has an MA in writing and education. He's worked in hundreds of schools, libraries, and festivals around the world. He's had books published by Bloomsbury, HarperCollins, and other major publishers, and he's written and performed for BBC television. His poems have been described as imaginative, brilliant, magical, and witty. Let's get him on the couch. Hello, Joshua. Welcome to On the Couch with Creatives. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I haven't seen you for 2 years when you won the People's Book Prize 2022 for children's literature. So it's lovely to see you again. And of course, this is the first time you're meeting Melanie.
Yeah.
Can we go back to obviously your childhood when you
Okay.
obviously must have started making up rhymes and poems in your head?
I don't know if I did. I remember finding the process of learning to read really kind of troubling and a bit boring. I remember my mum sort of saying, "Oh, it's time to read. We need to go and sit on the sofa," and sounding out all the letters. And I didn't particularly like that process. But what I did remember really enjoying was listening to my teachers at school during story time, and they would read poems and stories. I always really loved words. I've always loved the rhythm of words. I've loved the sound of words. And I think most importantly, maybe, I've always loved learning new words. I've loved the process of expanding my vocabulary ever since I was a child. And I've always just found words really fun to play with and to have fun with.
Oh, that's marvelous. That's marvelous for me to hear because my son, we are going through 11 plus hell at the moment. He
Oh
takes
no,
11
yeah,
plus in September. And the
yeah.
one
Good luck.
thing he loves what he's got a very good vocabulary. All his teachers are saying he's amazing. His writing is superb, very good vocabulary. Can I get him to read? Can I? Hell, he loves me reading. He loves
Yeah,
teachers reading. But at the moment, because I've banned him from the internet so we can get a good connection on this Zoom call, I said, read the book. And he's supposed to be reading for 20 minutes a day. I said, oh,
yeah.
Mum,
I mean,
read the book.
it's interesting because my attention span is actually very, very limited. I find it hard to concentrate. If I read a book, what I tend to do is read a couple of pages and then have a break, and then come back a bit later in the day and maybe read a couple more pages. My wife can actually devour a whole novel in a day, whereas I take weeks and sometimes months. And actually, that's one of the reasons I'm attracted to poetry as a form of writing, because you can really get a palpable sense of achievement with a poem in a relatively short space of time. I mean, most of my poems are less than 2 pages long, and you got to spend a good deal of time editing them. But that initial sense of achievement can be achieved really quickly with poetry, which is why I like it.
So, what made you start writing poetry? And when did you start writing it?
Interesting. So I don't think I started writing poetry in earnest until I was about 17 or 18 years old. I do remember when I was in in England, where I live, in London, we call it year four. So kind of 8-year-old, I think. Michael Rosen came to visit my school. I was hugely lucky. He had a big assembly, and I remember he stood up in assembly and he performed. He didn't have any books in front of him. He performed his poems and he really brought them to life. He almost kind of acted them out. And I remember finding that absolutely hilarious and brilliant. I wasn't yet tempted to give it a go myself until actually studying poetry for A-level. One of the poets we studied was a poet called Philip Larkin, who almost the polar opposite to Michael Rosen in some ways, because his poems are very, I don't know, quite laconic, perhaps. Some might say quite miserable, but I was a miserable kind of sullen teenager going through internal emotional turmoil. And I was really tempted to express myself in the form of poetry, having read some of Philip Larkin's poems. And then it was a further transition into children's poetry, which maybe we can come on to at some point.
Well, we can go on to it now. When did you start writing poetry for children?
Well, it's interesting because after A-levels, I went to university in London, and just around the corner from the university, there, sadly, it's no longer here, but there was a place called the Poetry Cafe in Covent Garden. And that was a place where people could go and read their poems out loud in something called an open mic session. And one of the and I sort of brought some poems there. And one of the things I was really attracted to initially was when people laughed. I got a really big buzz off people laughing at things I'd written. So I kind of started to kind of morph into trying to write kind of funny stuff. I did a few kind of bits and pieces of stand-up comedy. And then at the same time, I thought back to that Michael Rosen visit when I was in year 4. And I thought, well, Michael Rosen made children laugh. Kind of, I'm starting to get the hang of making people laugh. Maybe I can try and write some stuff that might appeal to children. And so I did that. And I come from a family of teachers. So my sister's a teacher. My wife, who I hadn't yet met at the time, but she is a teacher as well. So my sister said, why don't I go into her class and read some poems? And I did that. And as soon as I did that, I just got such a buzz. I knew that was really what I wanted to do with my life.
The thing is, that is the litmus test, isn't it? That if you read your poetry to children and they don't laugh, you know you're pretty crap at it.
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm not saying every single poem of mine has been a massive hit, but as long as you get a few, you know, kind of that you're on the right lines. And I have had the experience of reading a poem or performing a poem that I thought was brilliant, and it's actually got a fairly lukewarm response. And I guess what I would say is some poems just work better on the page. So, for example, my latest book is called Who Let the Words Out, published by Bloomsbury. And there are lots, this book is, there are lots of puns, a lot of very kind of intricate wordplay. And a lot of it actually wouldn't come across in performance. You actually need to sit down and read it on the page and work out the wordplay. So some of my poems lend themselves much better to performance than others. So my first book, I Don't Like Poetry, is full of performance poems. So even now, sort of 8 years on from having published this book, my poetry performance set still retains a lot of the poems from I Don't Like Poetry.
So how did you decide to start putting your poems in a book and to get published? How did that process happen?
So I decided because in 2013, which is now 11 years ago, no, 2012, wow, a long time ago. What's that, 12 years ago? I somewhat kind of foolishly decided to take a poetry show to the Edinburgh Fringe. So I thought I'm going to gather together an hour's worth of me performing my poems. There's something called the Free Fringe Festival as part of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, where you can go and do a show they don't charge you for the venue. You don't charge the audience to come and watch. So it's a really good, a lot of artists lose a lot of money during the Edinburgh Fringe. So that deal was very good. I thought I'm going to do that. I had no director, no producer, no editor, nothing. I just went there with a bunch of poems. And I thought, you know what, it would be quite nice to have something to sell to the audience after the performance. So I actually self-published my first 2 poetry collections in 2011 and 2012 and 2013, 2 self-published books. And as I started visiting schools, it was a great resource to have in the playground after school to sell and to sign. And children love receiving a physical copy of a book, I think.
Which books were these?
So they're both out of stock now, and sort of out of print, and I don't have copies in front of me. The first one was called "We All Love Llamas," because llamas are one of my favourite animals, and at the time I had quite a few llama-based poems. And the second book was called "My Grandpa's Beard," and that was a slightly more kind of professionally published book, but it was still self-published. So when I approached Bloomsbury a few years later to ask if they would publish a book of mine, I actually had a track record of my own self-publishing and promoting and selling. So that was a really good kind of catalyst to get me into the publishing world.
Yeah, if there's one thing publishers really like, it's knowing that any author they take on board is prolific, that they won't just get one book out of them.
Yeah, and I've had about, I think I'm on my 6th book from Bloomsbury now, 6th or 7th. And touch wood, that they continue to want to publish my books, and I continue to want to write them as well. So long may it continue.
Well, let's take a look at all the books that you actually have written, Joshua. What about, you started off with I Don't Like Poetry. Was that the first book that you published with Bloomsbury?
It was my first book that was published with Bloomsbury. I thought I would give it I hoped to give it quite a catchy title. My hope was that calling a book I Don't Like Poetry would inspire a bit of curiosity in people. And the intention behind the book was actually to produce a collection of poems for people that don't like poetry. I should say, if people do like poetry, hopefully they will like the collection as well.
Then the next one is Little Lemur Laughing.
Yes, I love lemurs. They're one of my favourite animals. That's a collection of poetry, very much performance-based. And that's aimed at younger children, so roughly kind of 3 to 7-year-olds.
And then Welcome to My Crazy Life.
Yes, another collection of poems along similar lines to I Don't Like Poetry, and yeah, fun poems, lots of wordplay, and there's a very, 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 very sad poem at the very end, and I'm not going to tell you what that's about. People will have to find out for themselves.
And then Who Let the Words Out? That's the one you were mentioning earlier.
There were actually 2 books before that. There was Yapping Away.
Oh, yes.
Which is another book for younger children. And that was the book that won the People's Book Prize. And then there was Who Let the Words Out, which is my latest collection of poetry. Heavy on wordplay, heavy on poetic techniques, trying to be fun and playful with language. And Who Let the Words Out is my latest book.
Okay, well, let's go back a bit, because you also wrote I Bet I Can Make You Laugh.
I did, yeah. That was a collection of poems I edited. So I wrote some of the poems, but I also put a big call out for submissions, and lots of my poetic friends submitted poems. And I tried to choose the funniest of those poems and include them in the collection.
And then you mentioned My Grandpa's Beard.
Yeah, well, that was one of my very first books. That was self-published. So that was before I had any publishing contracts with Bloomsbury or anyone else. That was a collection of poems I put together entirely by myself.
And then Poetry Is Not For Me. Is that similar to your previous book?
That's not a collection of poems. That's a very short chapter book, which is produced by HarperCollins as part of their Collins Big Cat reading scheme. And talking of big cats, I've actually got a pet cat called Bluebell. And my rule for whenever I do a Zoom interview or a Zoom visit, my rule is that Bluebell always has to come along. So I'm going to just show Bluebell to everyone. Hello, Bluebell. That's Bluebell. She's very cute.
I love cats.
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to mention cats just then.
And lastly, Yuck and Yum. Did that come out last year, or when did that?
No, Yuck and Yum came out a few years ago. And the special thing about that book is it was written in collaboration with a friend of mine called Neil Zetter, who is also a poet. I wrote half the poems, he wrote the other half of the poems, and we're good friends. He's one of my best friends on the poetry community.
He's so prolific.
Yeah, you talk about
It's interesting because poetry is very much kind of its own self-contained thing within the writing world. I was very, very lucky. So I got to know while I was visiting schools and kind of establishing myself on the performance circuit, I got to know lots of fellow poets, one of whom, a very lovely man called Roger Stevens, who is quite a prolific poet. And he included a poem of mine in an anthology that he edited for Macmillan Books. And he after having known him for a while, he very kindly, I think, agreed to introduce me to some of his editors at some of the publishing houses that he works with, one of whom, Bloomsbury, agreed to take me on. So for me, I was kind of embedded within the world of writing and poetry and performance for about 3 or 4 years before I was able to get my first traditional publishing deal with Bloomsbury, which I've never had an agent. So I did that without any agent, which is quite unusual, I think, in the writing world. But as I said, poetry writing is sort of fairly self-contained. So I don't know if my experience will necessarily translate to other writers in other genres.
But it does prove that you need to be out there, and you need to have a body of work behind you before any publisher will take you seriously.
Unless you're very, very, very lucky, I think what you say is true. Yeah.
And how are your books doing? Do they sell well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the official figures are. I get some fairly decent royalties each year, which is nice. Absolutely nothing remotely life-changing, but it's, it comes in a couple of times a year. And the main insights I have into how well my books sell is when I sell them myself in schools. When I do school visits, often, not all the time, but often I'll bring a box of books and sell them in the playgrounds after school. I've got a new card reader, which has been life-changing. And in my experience, when I visit schools, when children have had the opportunity to meet me and to listen to my poems and to work with me, in my experience, they tend to be pretty keen to buy my books, which I feel very fortunate about.
And do you travel all over the UK? Do you travel abroad?
I used to travel all over the UK, frequently staying in hotels overnight. I have been abroad. I've been to Belgium. I've been to Italy. I've been to Dubai twice. Scotland, if that counts as abroad. Since COVID, and everyone does Zoom now, I've tried to really curtail the distance which I travel. So I rarely travel to places that require an overnight stay now. But just because of the magic of Zoom and Teams and Google Meets, you can get similar writing outcomes. And schools pay so much less money as well. They don't have to pay for hotels, and it works pretty well.
How much COVID actually, the positive side of the lockdown was that everybody got onto Zoom in order to communicate with the outside world. And
Absolutely.
It actually changed so many people's lives. Not only have they started their own businesses during lockdown, but people like you also using Zoom as a communication tool.
I had no clue what Zoom was before COVID. So every we would have been having this conversation face to face. I would have been visiting schools face to face, which I still do masses of. But I'm really, I feel very fortunate and grateful to be able to have this kind of alternative way of working, which makes things a bit more interesting, and it gives me a few more lions, less early morning wake ups.
One of our members is one of our children's authors members, Sue Pavey. She has Zoom sessions with children all over the world, New Zealand, Australia. It's amazing.
I have done Zoom sessions all over the world. Off the top of my head, I've done India, Taiwan, China, Oman, I think, Thailand. Yes, I've done Thailand. So yeah, I've visited schools all over the world through the magic of the internet.
So how do people get hold of you if they want you to book you for a session?
Well, the best way is email. I'm pretty good with emails, and my email address is on the contact page of my website. I think one of the things which I invest quite heavily in is my website. And when I say invest, I mean invest not money, personal effort and time. I spend a lot of time working on my websites, trying to make it as fun as possible. There are lots of poems up there. It's www.joshuaseigal.co.uk for anyone who's interested. Please go on the website, and my contact details are on there. So that would be the best way of contacting me.
Well, I must apologize. When I introduced you for this chat on the couch, I called you Joshua Seigal.
Oh no, Seigal. It rhymes with eagle.
Oh,
Seigal.
Seigal.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
What? I didn't notice, to be honest. So don't worry.
Okay, now we at the part of our show where we would like you to give your top 3 tips to aspiring poets, people who would like to follow the same kind of career path that you are obviously very successful at.
So do you mean tips for children or tips for grown-ups?
For grown-ups, for the authors, for
Oh,
poets.
wow. I would say my first tip is don't be shy about putting yourself out there. I'm actually, believe it or not, by temperament, I'm an introvert. So this was quite hard in the initial stages of my career. I called up hundreds, and I got the contact details of all the schools in my local and surrounding areas. I spent hours calling them up, asking if I could come and visit. Cold calling, basically, and it's what I had to do towards the beginning of my career. So please don't be shy about doing that. That would be my first tip. Second tip would be make yourself an attractive website, or pay someone to make it for you, because before anyone can have a website. Not anyone can publish a book, but anyone can have a website, and just have a place, maybe not a website, but somewhere where you can showcase your work. I would say. And my third tip is to try and read lots of poems. And that way you know that what you're writing hasn't just been done before. And it's fun as well. And it expands your imagination, expands your kind of pool of inspiration, and try and do lots of reading as well as writing. Sometimes I'm guilty myself of maybe not reading as much as I should. But that would be another piece of advice.
And what about advice to children?
Oh, yeah. Crucially, poems do not have to rhyme all the time. I just rhymed. Children find it funny when I say that. Yeah, poems absolutely do not have to rhyme. So please don't rhyme just for the sake of it. That would be my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice, as with adults, I would say try and do lots of reading. Read lots of poems, read lots of different types of poems, watch poems on YouTube. And my third would be to try and write about things you're interested in. So my poems, lots of animal poems, poems about family, about school, memories, feelings, things that matter to me, things that I'm interested in. I don't write much poem. I don't write many poems about I don't know. I don't write many poems about rugby because I'm not interested in rugby. I don't think I have any poems about rugby. But I've got lots of poems about cats because I'm interested in cats. So basically try and write about things you care about. That would be a very important piece of advice.
Oh, brilliant pieces of advice. Before we go on to our last piece of the show, could you create a poem for us about creatives and creative people and the love of being creative? Do you think you could?
I don't know if I could create one off the top of my head, but am I allowed to read one from one of my books?
You are. I'll let you.
Okay, so this poem is called, it's from Yapping Away, and it's called Fill the World with Words. So when I get creative, I like to try and fill the world with words, and it goes like this. Words that whisper, words that shout, words that make you dance about, words you have to just let out. Let's fill the world with words. Words that skip and words that hop, words that jiggle, words that bop, Words that start and just won't stop. Let's fill the world with words. Words that laugh and words that cry, words that whoosh as they go by, words as sweet as apple pie. Let's fill the world with words. Words that soothe and words that tend, words that heal, words that mend. Words can be your new best friend. So let's fill the world with sausages. No, words, words. I made a mistake at the end there. But yeah, that was fill the world with words.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
You have to get Joshua to come and visit your son's school, Melanie.
Please do. Please do. Address on my website, as I said.
Absolutely. And I completely resonated with you when you said that you fell in love with poetry when Michael Rosen visited your school, because he visited my primary school and I fell in love with poetry. And
he's amazing.
Rosen, all in the same go, because I was like, oh, and I bought all his books, and then I got really into it for a while.
And actually, when he visited my school, this was in the days of cassette tapes. So we got one of his cassette tapes for the car, which we listened to on the way into school.
So now we've reached the point in our show where we're going to dig into your psyche a little bit. We're going to play the Values Jam game. So I'm going to run my...
This looks quite scary. Is it scary?
No.
I'm going to run my finger along my pack of cards. You're going to pick a card. Just tell me when to stop and we'll see what you picked.
Stop.
Right. Okay. What did you pick?
Now, just remember, whatever she asks you, there's no right or wrong answer, right?
Okay. Am I allowed to change my mind?
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
Okay. No worries.
You're free to say whatever you want to say.
Whatever comes into your head. Oh.
Okay.
You picked love.
Love. Oh, wow.
Love. And because we're creatives here on this show, we're going to ask you creatively about love. So, what does love mean to you? First of all, what does it look like?
It looks like cats. It looks like my wife. It looks like the park next to where I live. It looks like smiling and laughing children in schools that I visit. And it looks like books on a bookshelf.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like poems in a book. And it looks like a freshly prepared plate of spaghetti.
Oh,
wow. You've just described your entire life. So your life is just wrapped up in love.
Well, there's other things in my life that don't represent love, but those are some of the things that do.
I think that was awful, especially starting with cats. I like that, absolutely.
I like how the cat came before the wife as well, isn't that?
Well, the cat would come before the husband in his house too. What does it feel like?
It can feel scary. It can feel like anxiety, because when you love something, you put yourself in a position of vulnerability. With love comes the risk of loss. So it can feel scary, it can feel anxiety provoking, but it can feel like hard work, because when you love someone, you have to do things not just for you, but for them. And sometimes those things might not be easy. So it requires a lot of discipline. But it also feels wonderful. It feels like going to bed knowing that you are in the right place at the right time and are able to sleep soundly. So those are some of the things it feels like.
Oh, that's really, really lovely answers. What does it sound like? If it had a sound, what does it sound like?
If love had a sound, what would it sound like?
Yeah.
You know, this is actually very much like a writing activity I would do in school with children. So it's a really interesting and quite difficult way of provoking ideas. Love sounds like when you're in bed and it's nice and warm and there's rain pattering against the window, but you're dry inside and you know that you're protected from the rain. I think that sound is what love sounds like.
I like that. I like that. What does it smell like?
Cinnamon buns, freshly baked cinnamon buns.
Oh, yeah.
Not sausages.
Not sausage. I don't actually eat meat, to be honest. So I do enjoy sometimes the smell of meat, but no, cinnamon. I'm going with cinnamon buns.
Oh yeah, smells like Christmas.
Wonderful.
Love
We've
smells like Christmas.
We've so thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you, Joshua, and thank you so much for joining us on the couch.
Thank you. And it's interesting, just a lot of my poems are actually inspired by love and on the theme of love. So I'm really pleased that you asked me the question about love.
Yeah, so it was very appropriate, that one. You picked the right card.
You did, thank you.
Our guests always, uncannily, it's the energy from the universe. Our guests always pick a really good card for the thing we've been talking about.
Yeah, okay,
it's absolutely spooky. But it's amazing. It's so interesting. But thank you so much for spending time with us today. We have thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you for sharing your beautiful poetry with us.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And
I'm sure we will all be following you and watching your career with interest, and reading your poems to our children too.
Thank you very much.